Welcome. This is your Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, little quick inside Texas hit. We call it our roundtable. During the season, we have a full roster here that's giving you our predictions for the game and a little bit of update on what the team is doing. And in the offseason, we're going to bring you some information about what is happening with the team during workouts, how recruiting is going. And today, we're going to talk about two things in particular. One is the popularity of a specific coach, and two, the argument for Texas homerism. But let's get started with our buddy Kyle Flood. Today, we've got our friend Ian Boyd and Justin Wells with us, all from InsideTexas.com. Please check us out there whenever you get a chance. That's where the information really lives. But let's start with Kyle Flood. We've got, well, let's face it, this staff for the last few years has been the proverbial belle of the ball. Sarkisian has had some folks come after his staff. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Justin, because overall, this is a good thing, right? We want this type of exposure, but it's also a little bit scary for the fans, especially with a coach like Flood.
It is scary because you see great things growing in Austin, and then you see other schools noticing and wanting to take things away from you. And so as a fan, you almost become a child. You don't want to share that new toy. It's my new toy. And now the new toy's starting to really kick butt. So why am I having to share this thing? But you know what? That's a sign of a healthy program. That's a sign of a good head coach and a good administration and good just good job picking and choosing coaches to fill that mission. And so with Kyle Flood, his name was floated. When Jeff Hafley was announced, the former head coach at Boston College, to become the new defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers, and Flood's name was mentioned. He's got East Coast ties. Used to be a head coach for Rutgers. He's from that New Jersey area, and so the land of Sadir Mitchell. And so it was interesting to see his name in there. And so we did a little bit of back checking, a little bit of homework, and what we learned is that one, Sark, like I said, it's healthy when guys are trying to take your coaches. From the Texas staff and from Sark. But two, Sark has done an amazing job replacing the guys that have been taken. And you've seen kind of a youth movement. Kenny Baker is a prime example. People wanted a guy with more experience and more skins on the wall, or do you want a guy that wants to put more skins on the wall? Do you want a guy that's young and that's eager, that's energetic, that kind of a go-getter? Nothing against Bo Davis, but he wasn't the biggest fan of recruiting. Kenny Baker is immersed in it. And so with Kyle Flood, you have that fear of the guy that built the large human building, with all these gigantic offensive linemen. I mean, it's just something that Ian and I haven't, or Texas fans haven't seen in years, over a decade. And so you'd be a little worried, but to calm fears, understand there's a reason Hafley left BC. Lack of NIL, lack of recruiting resources, lack of help, administration, all that kind of stuff. Flood has been building a absolute monster of a unit at Texas, and there's really not a lot you don't want to leave what you've started to put together. Not to mention, this man just built a house in Westlake, and for the first time in a long time, his entire family, from him and his wife and his younger son, all live together. And for coaches for coaches' families, that's invaluable, guys. You really got to understand, Flood's been in the business long enough. You're only going to make so much money that at some point you got to find happiness. You know what that happiness is for Kyle Flood, aside from building the gigantic array of humans in Austin? Watching his son play. His son's in middle school, and he's going to be at Westlake. He's got an older son, graduated from Alabama. He's got an older daughter as well, but he wants to watch his young boy play. And I think that's just perspective. I think that's Kyle Flood. Hey, you should be honored when his name pops up for head coaching positions. We've seen Jeff Banks' name pop up in a handful of positions, for interviews. I remember UTEP. I remember Washington State. We saw Jeff Choate name mentioned for a couple of years, and then he gets the Nevada job. And so, but for Flood to calm any Texas fans' fears, I think Flood is exactly where he wants to be right now. I think he absolutely loves being with Sark. I think he loves building that big room, that big factory of beef. And at the end of the day, he wants to be happy and watch his son play football at Westlake.
I think we're probably going to see this more and more, where like a school like Boston College is going to have to go get the Kenny Baker version of a head coach, because the older guys are going to be like, man, if I go be a head coach somewhere, I got to arm wrestle the administration about NIL. I got to politic with the boosters more than ever to raise funds. I got to go be like, running a super PAC basically to get money into the program. Then I got to manage all the egos that creates in my locker room. I got to hire staff. It's terrible. Like, why would you want to? If you're an older coach and like Flood, like being a pseudo offensive coordinator and an offensive line coach with Sarkisian and Austin, this is pretty good. I've been a head coach before. It was okay. Now it would be a lot worse. I just think you're just going to have to see more young guys that are, they don't have a nostalgia for the way things used to be. They just have a hunger.
Yeah.
It'll be great in the era they're actually in. So this will probably be a common thing amongst, and also with the big two conferences, like being an offensive coordinator at Texas is now just a very different thing in comparison to being a head coach at a smaller program with the greater divorce in between levels of college football.
But there's also, I think, and I'm glad you pointed that out, with those two conferences, we're and again, look, the Big 12 is in there. There are, and I hate to use the word tertiary, but there are some, conferences on the periphery that are still of a certain caliber. But when we're really talking about the Big 10 and the SEC, those numbers of prime jobs just got a lot smaller. We went from a Power 5 really to a Power 2, and that's really concentrating the level of talent, but also the level of opportunities for these coaches. So they have to think to themselves, look, I've got some resources to put some skins on the wall. Am I going to do that exactly as Ian said at one of these schools where I may not necessarily have the big job? Will that translate to a head job? And then after that, what is that head job going to look like? Is it going to be in a Power 5? Do I need to go to an FCS school? Where are those opportunities? And I think over the next few years, as these two power conferences are starting to establish themselves in the landscape of college football, we're going to get a really good chance to see where college coaching development is going to happen. Will it happen at the forgive me, coordinator role, or is it going to happen at a smaller school? And it's weird to say, but we're now looking at a Boston College like a smaller school, and that wasn't the case 5-6 years ago. So all of that is changing. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about something that is probably wildly inappropriate given the calendar, but let's talk about next year and where we think Texas is going to end up next year. And we're going to call this the argument for Texas homerism. And this argument is going to come from a very unlikely source. I'd love to hear Ian Boyd's take on why the University of Texas should be considered the greatest program in the history of mankind.
Well, let's take a small step back from there and start with 2024.
All right, fine.
I think for me, at least, as recently as a month ago, 3 weeks ago, before it became clear that Quinn Ewers was going to come back, you look ahead to 2024, year one in the SEC, and I thought 8-4, 9-3, that's a good year one in that league. It's going to be tougher. Texas is going to be replacing a lot of people that were engines for their success in the Big 12 championship this season. You flash forward, 3 out of the 4 head coaches in the playoffs are no longer at their former jobs. Texas is the only one that's still retained their head coach. Alabama stole one of the other playoff head coaches, but they lost a chunk of their roster and are completely turning over their program.
Yeah.
Jim Harbaugh leaves Michigan. Ohio State pushes crazy all in, maybe forced Ryan Day to hire Bill O'Brien to be offensive coordinator. Wild things are happening. Then back at Texas, Jahdae Barron, who I thought was a lock to be drafted, is back. Alfred Collins, who could definitely have been drafted, decides to come back. Quinn Ewers obviously comes back. Texas sees that. They reload in the transfer portal. They bring in Silas Bolden, Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden for Quinn Ewers to throw to. All of a sudden, you're talking about a reload. And you just compare what they're bringing back now, much of it unexpected, compared to where the other top programs are. And it gets really hard to come up with another program that has as much firepower and momentum heading into this next season as Texas does.
Ian, do you think it's because Texas reloaded, but they reloaded at key positions? Like they had a lot of guys come back, like you'd mentioned, Ewers and Barron and those guys. And then you got Kelvin Banks going into his de facto draft year, essentially, because he's going to be a 3 and done. And so, but from the bigger scope, a Trey Moore coming in, a Sevilla coming in on the defensive line, Makuba adding to the riches of the secondary. I don't think it's just Texas did well in the portal. I think they filled every hole they had, essentially. And outside of Georgia and Ohio State, I think, are the other 2 teams that are in this conversation for that number 1 spot. But to me, it's the fact they filled vital holes. It wasn't necessarily stocking the roster from the bottom up. It was, hey, they needed a spot at safety, go get one. They needed another guy at edge, they go get one. They needed a defensive tackle, go get one. They needed to redo the wide receiver room. 3 more come through. To me, that's the most important factor. It's not just filling holes, it's filling needs. And I think you nailed it. It's not a rebuild at all. It's a reload.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about like so much of this offense is throwing the ball
Vertical.
and wanting NFL receivers to run down the field. And they were looking at, we always knew they were going to be portal heavy, but because they were so young in that room. But to go from just the level of talent and proven skill that they brought in the receiver room is maybe a little more than we thought, right?
Yes, definitely more speed.
Partly because we didn't know Nick Saban was going to retire and open up, the treasure that he had been sleeping on in the mountain, right? Like a dragon, just be pillaged. So
do we feel that with the 2 factors that I'm hearing and to put into summation are the idea that, one, there's been consistency at Texas versus the other top programs in this last offseason. We've had major changes in all the 4 playoff teams with the exception of Texas. But also, we've been hearing this, and I want to talk about this a little bit because let's just face it, we're kind of shooting for the moon here a little bit, talking about next year already and predicting where we're going to finish. But let's talk a little bit about after 2025. Or 2024, right? So after 2024, we have got a team coming back that will be wildly experienced by that point. We've heard our friend Eric say it. This is in some ways even the year before the year. And I have to say that that's pretty scary if you really think about it, with the amount of talent that is currently being fielded. And specifically, let's talk, Justin, I would like to a little bit. This goes back to Kyle Flood. We've got an offensive line that is really starting to become a little bit of a conveyor belt, just moving talent through with experience. And I'd love for you to expand on that idea a little bit.
Well, you nailed it. I think the year before the year, 25 could be absolutely huge, but there's going to be one position that takes a pretty big hit. That's the offensive line. Kelvin Banks is gone.
Right.
Jake Majors is getting drafted. And DJ Campbell, don't be shocked. He has rededicated himself to getting in shape. They watched Christian Jones make some money this week in Mobile. And right. Christian Jones last year at this exact same time rededicated himself to fitness, to good work habits, to good eating, similar to Quinn Ewers, similar to some other guys. And so you've got guys that are like, you know what? I can get up and go. If I have an all-conference year and really do my job, I can get out of here. So you could essentially see 4 guys from the offensive line gone, after 2024. And so you think, okay, who's going to, fill in that spot? Because now that's the line that protects Arch Manning.
Right. And
that's where I think the conveyor belt line is accurate, because there's guys, Trevor Gooseby, we talk about him a lot at InsideTexas.com. Please come see us at InsideTexas.com. It's a great time. Let us earn your business. We talk about him a lot for a reason. His athleticism is off the charts. He is developing and progressing, I think, quicker than the staff even imagined. And I think he's a viable left tackle when Kelvin Banks leaves. Brandon Baker, He's new on campus out of Mater Dei, the 5-star tackle. I think you'll probably see him start off at right tackle, maybe go to left tackle in a couple of years. It's kind of unsure where he's going to be right now. But, from what I was told, he needs to get stronger, which is every early enrollee freshman that ever comes in. But that his athleticism was more surprising than people anticipated. And so that secession is going to be big. Because, you want to go, you got to be strong going into the SEC that first year, but you've got a seasoned quarterback back there that's going to make the job a little bit easier. And all of a sudden, you've got a running back room that last year looked like a question mark. This year is a plus. But that shift to Arch, you don't think they're not going to protect that kid? You're not going to think they're not going to do every single thing in their power for when Arch takes over in 2025 and he takes the reins as the Texas starting quarterback? To me, that's going to be the biggest question. And I think they're already trying to solve that this spring. Matter of fact, we know they are. They're looking at a succession plan, and that is a healthy program. That's a team. Why Ian can come out and say they might be number one for 2024. It's not just who they return. It's not just who they reloaded. It's that they have a plan in place to maintain that spot for the next, at least for the foreseeable future. And so I think that's the most important part is the fact that they're, 3 years ago, it was, can you find 5 guys?
Right. Yeah.
2 years ago, it was, okay, we want 7 guys. So we can rely on 7 guys. And then last season, it was 8. Okay, we got to have 8 guys that we can rely on. Going into spring, Kyle Flood wants 10.
Yeah.
He wants a full 2 deep. And to me, that's the definition of a conveyor belt healthy program.
It's not something that we have experienced at the University of Texas in a long, long time. Ian, I'd love to hear your thoughts on not only this, like we've heard how you think that the University of Texas, I think you were quoted as saying, being world beaters and never losing a game for the next 3 years. But how does that look and how does that translate into the first year of Arch? What do we see? And again, this is ridiculous that we're talking about this in February of this year, but what are you seeing being a major transition into the Arch era?
Well, I think they may have been planning for, 2025 until Quinn Ewers was coming back.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you don't mind taking a step back and having a learning curve with a redshirt freshman Arch Manning in 2024. You have the built-in excuse of year one in the SEC. I don't think that's like, you want to do the best you can every year for your seniors and for all the contract year players and whatnot. But the equation changed when Quinn Ewers decided to come back. And the equation changed again when Nick Saban retired. And you just have, we saw this at Oklahoma with Bob Stoops and Lincoln Riley, where it got to the point where it was like, they have such stability at the top of that program that every year can be a competitive year.
Yes.
Now, for them, that was Big 12 championship, and aiming higher than that was just beyond their grasp. I think for Texas, when things are running smoothly, they can reach higher on the shelf, so to speak. And so I think where maybe it would have been, where Texas is in this rebuild with Sark is, maybe take a lump here, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Now, because of the instability around college football and how well it's gone back in Austin, you have the expectations are changing very quickly.
Absolutely. I think this is, first of all, this is what you're getting on a Saturday, guys. This is a Saturday in the off season. We're talking about a little bit of what our life is going to be like in 2 years. That to me is actually a pretty good sign about where we are with the state of the program and being able to have these really ridiculous hypothetical conversations because there's such a strong foundation. And let's face it, just without going into too much detail, because I know that this is, if you need more information on recruiting, the state of the program, we've just done another YouTube video on that. And obviously check out InsideTexas.com. It's $1 for your first month. There's we have made it virtually impossible for you to say no to that, to be honest. Come check us out. If you do not in any way love the community that we have built out there and been able to foster with the great people that we have, then go somewhere else. Totally fine. You're out $1. It's not a big deal. But for us, we love to talk about the recruiting and what's going on next. So Justin, really quickly, without going into too much detail, because I know that this is your forte, you talk about it all the time. But as we're talking about this, and I'm going to use this phrase again, this conveyor belt, keeping these rooms going. I mean, the one that is the most obvious, I think, to everyone is that running back room. I mean, Choice has just been absolutely crushing it in terms of keeping that room stocked. Are there any other areas, any other coaches that you might be able to highlight just in terms of their rooms just consecutively get better and better?
Well, first, I want to double down on something you said about, we're talking 2 years out. And I can explain it quickly with, if the coaches at Texas are talking about it, we're going to write about it.
Right.
And if they're having the discussions, guess what? We're having the discussions. And like you said, that's a really cool thing to be able to forecast. If I'm looking at rooms that I think are building potential monsters, outside of what we'd already discussed, you can pick your poison. I mean, you can look in the secondary, and in 2026 draft, you're looking at, multiple guys going to the league, a Malik Muhammad, a Derek Williams, but I'm going to take the linebacker room.
All right.
Because I think Anthony, losing Jalen Ford, losing DeMarvion Overshown, you lost your hyper athletic hybrid linebacker. Jalen Ford took a major step forward, huge. Could have gone to the draft last year.
Right.
Now, he had another good senior year. He's out. Anthony Hill comes in now. So we're seeing some of a succession there already. Not to mention the fact that you've got some guys from the last cycle that are starting to build. And you've got a couple veterans like a Maurice Blackwell. I think David Benda coming back is going to be bigger in the locker room than it is on the football field. And He's pretty damn good on the football field. And so I'm going to go with the linebacker room. I think Johnny Nansen showed up and just smiled, because he's got an Anthony Hill, who's a future NFL star, and a guy that they're going to move to Mike Backer, and now he's going to take on that role of being the guy to kind of quarterback everyone on that. And I don't know if you could find a better guy to do it. And then I'm hearing something about this freshman named Ty Anthony Smith, early enrollee out of Jasper, late flip from Texas A&M. That kid in workouts only knows one speed, and that's 100%. And, sometimes kids get to college and they already think they've made it. Sometimes they feel like they had 5 stars or 4 stars, and that's credibility. But once you enroll, you have no stars. And Ty Anthony Smith, if you ask him, how many stars did you have in high school? He said, none. I'm in college. I don't have any. And I think that's the attitude you want in that linebacker room. You've got some really good young guys. I love Leona LaFau. I mean, that guy brings hat on a religious basis. Anthony Hill, Ty Anthony Smith, Maurice Blackwell, David Benda. I'm sure I'm missing Darian Gillette, who I think could play some inside back or some will. I think could play some edge. I mean, he's fully come off that injury now, and he's flashed a little bit, during last season's practices, scout team and that sort of thing. So that was a great question. I try to do it as quick as possible, because me, I ramble. I'm a talker. I'm gonna call it like I call it.
No, you do.
But give me the linebacker room. I really like where that's going, and I think Johnny Nansen giggled when he looked at the roster, watched a little bit of the film, and thought, "Let's get to business."
It's the same question to you, Ian. Is there a particular room that you see? I think, we talked a lot about the offensive line, and I think we've done a good job of outlining the work that Kyle Flood has done to build up that room. But is there a room outside of that you're seeing as being maybe even surprisingly good?
Well, the secondary, I think, is a lot better now than people. I mean, in the wake of getting completely eviscerated by Penix and Washington, all of a sudden the secondary, looking ahead to next year, is starting to look pretty good, because you added Makuba, who's very good in coverage as a safety, and it looked like he was going to replace Barron, but then you retain Barron. And then your next best safety in coverage, the most athletic guy, is Derek Williams, who was a true freshman last year. And then your starting cornerbacks in the playoff game were a freshman in Malik Muhammad and then a sophomore in Terrence Brooks. You have all this youth that's coming back. Young guys get better. Usually can bank on that. And then they have in Barron and Makuba, two of the better coverage safeties and two of the smarter defenders. That, I mean, if you have like one guy like that, you're pretty excited. To have two, they may have a level of versatility and overall skill and athleticism in the secondary that we haven't seen since, Justin, help me out. 2017?
I'd say Chris Boyd, Holden Hill.
2017. Sean Elliott.
Yeah. Brandon Jones, the safety. Yeah.
Yep.
It sounds a lot.
It's loaded, and also I want to just one more thing in the secondary. You know, like you said, it's youth. Malik Muhammad, Terrence Brooks, those guys. But don't forget the 3 corners they brought in to this 2024 cycle, 2 of which enrolled early, are at the same level Brooks and Muhammad were in high school, if not more upside. Kobe Black at 6'2", 200 pounds on an island. That's ridiculous. That's the new prototype. Wardell Mack is already turning heads in early workouts. That is a kid from Dubuque that plays like he came up out of the mud. You know, he is a dog that pisses in the neighbor's yard and eats out of Alpo. And then you've got Santana Wilson, who might have the best feet of all of them. Adrian Wilson's son, former Pro Bowler with the Arizona Cardinals. His son's Santana. He's going to be on campus, Scottsdale kid, in June. And so, not just to counter with Ian's point, those corners and those safeties already look good. And then look at the guys coming in. And then you've got an Xavier Filsaime, who they flipped from Florida late, the 5-star out of McKinney. That room, that's why I almost picked the secondary, LC, because that room, when Mac Brown started stacking those guys in the secondary in the early 2000s, that's when you saw that big turn on that side of the ball.
Absolutely.
You know, when Aaron Ross couldn't crack the starting lineup and won a Thorpe, that's when things really turned back there. And in a spread era, having those kind of guys, you can't quantify that.
It's also where a school like Texas, like the state of Texas, probably produces skill talent. That's probably like one of its most unique advantages. So like for the University of Texas to be great in a given year is probably going to correspond to having an elite secondary and building a case as DBU, because otherwise they're not really maximizing their advantage of being the University of Texas.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm hearing after today, the major story of 2024 sounds really to me like it's going to be what Texas kept. Certainly, we had a lot of influx of new talent through both recruiting and the transfer portal. But who we were able to retain and keep out of the draft, for lack of a better term, may be the deciding factor in how well Texas does next year. I want to thank everybody for checking in with us today. This is a nice way to spend your Saturday morning. It certainly is for us. Please check us out at InsideTexas.com. It is only $1 for that first month. There's lots of articles and interviews that are going on in there that give you the insight that you're not able to get anywhere else. And if you could, please like and subscribe to this. This allows us the opportunity to keep doing this for you. And frankly, for us, it keeps us away from our families, which is something that's really important to us, especially Ian, who has a very, very big family. Thank you all very much, and hook 'em. We'll see you later.